Hello and good evening. This is Stevie Guardiola from St. Mary's University. I am our Senior Coordinator for Financial Aid Initiatives, and I have lots of experience in financial aid. So what I'm here for today and this evening is to give you basic information about financial aid, how to get financial aid, and what it entails. So let's talk a little bit about what you're thinking about when you're thinking about college. As a parent, you may be thinking about, how am I going to afford this? Will my child thrive here? Is it a safe environment? Children may be thinking, oh, I'm becoming an adult. I want to go to this institution. But the first thing that we need to think about is cost. So when we're thinking about going to a university, we want to look at several things that include the cost of attendance. So there's variables when you're considering different universities. Universities, colleges, community colleges. The cost of attendance is important because it basically is the starting point of how you get financial aid. Cost of attendance includes tuition and fees, books, room and board, and personal and transportation cost. Now, one thing to keep in mind is frequently asked question is, what's personal and transportation costs? Will I be billed this? No. Universities are usually just going to bill you tuition fees, books, and room and board if your student is living on campus. But the personal and transportation is part of the cost of attendance for you to get a good idea of what is this going to cost me overall in a year. Now, FAFSA also awards students and universities award students based on that overall cost of attendance. So let's move forward and think about, okay, what's next when we're looking at FAFSA? When we're looking at applying for financial aid, we have to come up with a figure on everybody's level of need. How do we find out what your need is? What we do is we estimate a family's ability to be able to contribute to the cost of college by using a formula. That's what FAFSA is doing in the background. It's asking you a series of questions about your finances and your students' finances to determine what is your ability to pay. Now, one frequently asked question is, what if I disagree with the amount that FAFSA comes up with? There is a process to review that and make sure that it is correct. But most of the time, FAFSA's matrix or FAFSA's formula is going to determine based on things that you have to pay, your bills, your mortgage, your food, and things that you need, medical expenses. Those things are taken in consideration when the FAFSA is looking at your ability to pay. Now, after the cost of attendance, then we subtract that number that comes from FAFSA, the EFC, which you will see when you fill out the FAFSA, and that determines your need. Let's move forward. Now, FAFSA starts, the opportunity to start filing a FAFSA is October the 1st. So that was actually this past Friday. So if FAFSA is available and you want to have your student actually fill out the 2022 to 23 FAFSA. So the 2022 to 2023 FAFSA is available for your student to fill out now. It's important for your student to fill it out earlier than later. And the reason being is most universities and colleges will start sending out award letters in early December. So what you want to do is be able to have plenty of time to look at the different offers of the universities that your student is looking at. Another important date is the last day to file a FAFSA is usually March 1st. And that's because most universities are going to have to award several students. So like I said, the earlier the better because you don't want to be the last one to apply. May 1st is another important deadline that is specific to St. Mary's. In fact, we changed our deadline to June 1st to give students a little bit more time for what's called the verification process. Not everyone has to go through that process, but it is about 40% of everybody who files for financial aid has to provide additional documentation, and I'll explain a little later what that means. So, okay, let's go back to cost of attendance, family contribution, and my need. So your need as a student or your parent, your student's need is going to basically give the universities an opportunity to grant these types of funds. So you're looking at the academic scholarship, and that depends on the school. Like my school does offer academic scholarship based on their merit for every single student that comes in. That is basically something that's given during admission. So you want to make sure your student is asking that during the admission process. Is there an academic scholarship tied to my financial aid? Then there's need-based grants. Those are either through the government or the state or sometimes the institution. And that would be like your Pell Grant or your Texas grant or an institutional grant that that school has. There's also student employment or work study opportunities if you are eligible as a student to work on campus for those funds to be able to help pay for school. Another couple items are your Stafford loans. There are Stafford loans for students and there are parent loans for students or parent student loans. And those are government student loans. Now, I will explain the differences in the different Stafford loans in a little while. Another thing to keep in mind is if parents of your veterans, you may be eligible for veteran education benefits. And in order to find out if you can utilize those at your institution the student will go to, you want to first contact the Department of Education through the VA. They will give you a certificate of eligibility to tell you what you qualify for, and then you work with the financial aid office at the school to find out how you can use those benefits at the school. Some schools only take VA Chapter 31, 33, 35. Some schools, mostly public schools, take a Hazelwood Act in the state of Texas. So something to think about. Then there's also private student loans, which would come probably after everything else if you're still needing additional financial aid. And then, of course, outside scholarships. So let's go back to student loans and talk a little bit about that. Your student most likely will be offered one or both of the student loan options for Stafford loans. One is the subsidized loan. So if you qualify based on your need, that one does not have interest while your student is in school. The other is the unsubsidized, which means the government is not subsidizing the interest while your student is in school. The interest is pretty low, but it does accrue while your student is in school. The interest for that loan will start when your student accepts it and starts school, usually in August. Now, the interest rate is low, so even if you receive only the unsubsidized, it's usually about a 3% interest rate. Now, all of these loans do not need to be paid back while your child is in school. It's deferred actually even 6 months after they graduate so that they can determine if they're going to go to graduate school or they want to start making repayments. Now, another thing to keep in mind is if you do get an interest-bearing loan, you can pay interest while your student is in school, or your student can pay the interest. So they can send $20 a month to make sure that these loans are not accruing interest. So that's a possibility. Another option is to take out only one of the loan or a portion of the loan. Whatever it is, how you work the finances, that's also an option. So let's go back a little bit to outside money. Outside money is the best money. That's what we want to see. We want our students to get this outside organization nonprofit funding. What I do want to give you, and I won't list all of these tips, but make sure, one, they ask their high school counselor where they can start looking for these scholarships now. I do have some .coms on the side that you can take note of, and the presentation, of course, is being sent to you so that they could see these .coms to look for. Be mindful of deadlines. Super important that they're paying attention to deadlines and maybe putting it on their calendar or their phone that they need to apply to these scholarships by these dates. Never pay for a scholarship search or to apply to a scholarship. That's usually a scam. And never provide a social security number. No scholarship should ask for that. That's not something that's safe and not smart for your student to be providing that. And that's pretty much it for outside scholarships. One thing to know is that if your student isn't applying now, encourage them to start, and then that's going to be something that's ongoing while they're in college the whole time. Usually what will happen is your student will be admitted into a university and they may have their own scholarship search and their own way for your student to look. Right now, you want to use these other organizations to start looking for scholarships. All right, so back to what we're here for. Obviously, your student needs to start applying for the FAFSA or the TASFA. Now, what's the difference? So if your student is a citizen of the United States, they're most likely going to file a FAFSA. Only non-citizens will file a TASFA. So TASFA is for students that are not U.S. citizens but have lived in the state of Texas. And it will tell them if they qualify for TASFA, and the university or the school will tell you if they take TASFA. And that's at collegeforalltexans.com for TASFA. And most importantly, FAFSA is at studentaid.gov. All of the information that I'm telling you today is at studentaid.gov, and it's also where you apply for the FAFSA. Now, what do you need to start? Okay, most importantly is usually your tax information, social security numbers for parents and student. The first thing is your FSA ID, and everybody's like, well, am I going to get that in the mail? What is this exactly? You actually have to create an FSA ID. The student does, and one of the parents, not both parents, just one. Whoever's going to electronically file the FAFSA. So usually what happens is the student will go ahead and choose a parent to do the process of signing the FAFSA. Another question is what parent do I use? It's the main parent that you live with 51% of the time if your parents are not together. And then another thing to remember is that only one parent needs to do the FSA ID, but all students need to create this. This stays with you throughout your whole college experience, and every year you file the FAFSA, which you will have to renew every year, you'll use that same FSA ID. Now, income tax information is going to actually be from 2020. You need 2 years prior information. The reason FAFSA does that is because they want parents to have enough time to have filed their taxes. If something has changed, there is opportunities to change this information, and I'll explain that later. Bank statements and records of any type of investments, any untaxed income, should be from the current year. So the only thing that you're using 2 years prior are taxes. For the TASPA, we're not going to ask for an FSA ID or social security number, obviously. We're just going to be needing tax return information, W-2s, statements of investments and income, of course, on any untaxed income as well. This goes for parents and dependent students. Okay, so remember on the timeline I mentioned, there's this thing called verification and it has a deadline of either May 1st or June 1st. What that is that 40% of all FAFSA filers are going to be selected for verification. So what they're doing is just verifying that the information that you put on FAFSA is correct. What will happen is after the student files the FAFSA, they may receive an email telling them, hey, you've been selected for verification. Your school is going to contact you. You will, if you're applying to, let's say, 4 different schools, you will have to file verification for all 4. They will have all 4 different forms. They may sound like a hassle, but one thing that I can tell you and give you a little bit of advice, use the IRS data retrieval tool. And what that does is it transfers all the tax data onto the FAFSA. All you're doing is inputting and logging into the IRS while you're in the FAFSA. If you do this, you won't have to send any tax documents to the schools. If you successfully transfer all the data, then they won't need that additional document. They'll only need the verification form that just says who lives in the house, sign for student, sign for parent. It's fairly simple. Now, again, you're going to need taxes from 2 years prior, which you should already have available to you, and of course W-2s, and that's just to verify the income in the household. So another thing parents, families, and students always ask is, this last year and a half has been very difficult. Many families have lost income, and we have a process for that. So you may be reporting income from 2020, and that may not be the case today. So we have something called special conditions, and every university and every college should have this process. You contact the financial aid office at the school and you tell them, hey, my taxes say I make this much, but my wife is not working, or I make less money, or there was a divorce, or I have a little child in private school. These are some of the things that we can consider, or even exuberant medical expenses that something was not in the budget. So these are ways that we can adjust FAFSA to make that family contribution lower than what we initially thought it would be. Remember, the EFC, expected family contribution, is your ability to pay. That can only be changed through the process of verification or special conditions. Now, your student's going to receive a report at the end of FAFSA telling them, okay, you finished. You may be eligible for XYZ. This is important because this student aid report is the key for them to get estimates at different universities. So what happens is the student may forgot to have sent their FAFSA to a specific school, but they're really interested in this school after some research. So what they can do is, hey, financial aid office at Notre Dame University, I have my SAR here. I didn't send you my FAFSA, but I have my student aid report. that financial aid administration office can give you an estimate of financial aid just based on that. That's why it's so important. It also shows you that you've confirmed that your FAFSA is complete. So let's go ahead and move forward here and talk about some common errors. So another thing that you want to think about when you're doing your FAFSA is you include everybody in your household. Let's say your household has mom and student and 2 siblings, you want to put that on there. Another thing is families will ask, well, they ask me if I have a father, but if you're not living with your mother full-time or your father full-time, you're only going to count who's in your household. That includes grandparents, if grandparents are living with you and parents are supporting them. Legal guardianship. A lot of students will think, well, I'm not under a legal guardianship because I'm 18 or I am under a legal guardianship. It's a very confusing question. But legal guardianship actually has legal paperwork attached to it, and that means that your student had been either put under a guardianship before the age of 18. It is a little confusing on FAFSA, so just watch out for that one. Make sure that both the student and the parent sign. It is not complete until both the student and the parent submit signature with their FSA ID. Also, reporting the correct marital status on the taxes. That will trip you up and get selected for verification and could delay the process if, for instance, both parents filed head of household, but they were living at the same address. So make sure all of that is fixed before you file FAFSA, because that will come up in the verification process. Another thing is fully submit everything with all signatures. I think we talked about that. And just make sure that you get that student aid report, because that's the key to say, hey, I'm done. All right, so there's lots of questions that may come up. So what I did here is put out here our financial aid email and our phone number. Now, my name is Stevie Guardiola, and I will go ahead and share my email with your high school counselor, and he will be able to connect you with me specifically if you have certain questions. I'd be happy to answer. You will have a copy of this presentation, and that way you can get some more information at your own leisure time. But I hope this gave you a little glance of what to look forward to. And I hope everybody does the FAFSA soon, early. I always say apply before the pie, which is November, Thanksgiving. And that way you can get an award letter sometime in December. That award letter is going to be your, oh, okay, this is how I can pay for college, and this is what I'm looking at. You want to be comparing those award letters if you're looking at more than one school. And if you ever need help with that, go to your financial aid office at any of those universities, and they will be happy to explain it to you. Thank you again, Stevie Guardiola at St. Mary's University, and you have a good day.